All right, here we are again. This is the third of the lectures for the second half, for the second test of History 2303. So this is the third lecture today that I'm filming. But we need to talk about the Mexican War, because annexation by the Republic of Texas into the United States caused obvious problem. And please understand that there's a correlative effect of American history and Texas history. Manifest destiny, the desire by the United States to take in available lands as a result of this 1840 manifest destiny desire to expand from ocean to ocean and maybe to the North Pole to the South Pole, had a direct correlative effect of causing a war with Mexico. Because Mexico, even if she recognized the independence of the Republic of Texas, didn't recognize the border of the Rio Grande. She preferred the Nueces River as the appropriate boundary between the two countries. And the truth of the matter is, probably, I'd have to say that Mexico was right. If you've ever driven down to the Rio Grande Valley from Kerrville, you know that once you get past the Nueces River, the topography of South Texas is very much like the topography of northern Mexico. And maybe the truth of the matter is the Nueces probably should have been the appropriate boundary between the two countries, if not the Rio Grande. But the border issue caused a war with Mexico. And Zachary Taylor immediately took up provocative action against Matamoros and the Mexican troops that were stationed there, and then physically invaded the northern part of Mexico. Monterrey, Mexico was 100 miles into the interior of Mexico, and General Taylor had an army of about several thousand, including 6,000 Texans who volunteered for service in the Mexican War. And within weeks, he had taken Monterrey, September the 25th of 1846. Monterrey, Mexico fell, and it was 100 miles into the interior of Mexico. And in February the 23rd and 24th of 1847, General Taylor then defeated Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, leading the Mexican army, at the Battle of Buena Vista. It is important to note that at times in our national history of the United States, when we attempt to negotiate with a foreign government, if that government is unsympathetic to the United States' interests or our demands, we do some unscrupulous sort of things like overthrowing that government and providing a government that is more amenable to the United States. And during the Mexican War, James K. Polk had negotiators with the State Department traveling with General Taylor, and then later with Winfield Scott's army that invaded, a second American army that invaded Veracruz, New Mexico, and then marched into the interior of Mexico, taking Mexico City. These negotiators would have negotiated an end to the Mexican War if any responsible Mexican government official had said, okay, we want to quit, and we recognize that the United States is a superior force, and we'll give you land to resolve the concerns that you have with Mexico. That's what the Americans wanted, was land. And this was a war of national aggression, really, that James K. Polk had started with Mexico. And when the Mexican government, no Mexican official would step forward to say, maybe we need to negotiate with the United States, the U.S. government did something very interesting. Congress, the United States Senate, in secret negotiations, appropriated $2 million, and President Polk sent John Slidell to Mexico City, because there was one politician now in exile in Havana, Cuba, that would have been able to take America's money and with clear conscience do whatever he thought was best, and that was Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. John Slidell travels to Havana, Cuba, meets the exiled president of Mexico, and says to him, General Santa Anna, there's $2 million in this suitcase. Use whatever you need to buy your way back into power in Mexico, with the understanding that as soon as you become president of Mexico, you will negotiate an end to this war and cede over to the United States lands that have previously belonged to Mexico. And General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna probably did the Jerry Maguire thing, said, show me the money. And Santa Anna took $2 million of American money, promptly bought his way back into power with a considerable amount, the rest that went into his bank account. And when Santa Anna returned to power in Mexico, he immediately announced that he had come back from exile to save Mexico from the Norte Americano invader. And it was Santa Anna who was leading the Mexican army against Taylor at the Battle of Buena Vista. So, we Americans are sort of hard-headed, and we don't learn our lessons of foreign policy very well. How many times have we offered money to despots and dictators who installed themselves in government and then tell us, hey, take your money and you know what you can do with it, because the truth is I am the leader of my nation. And Santa Anna did the same thing to the United States, refusing to negotiate an end to this conflict. Once Buena Vista was fought in February of 1847, the northern mountains of Mexico were such that Taylor couldn't invade any further into the interior of Mexico. So a second army under a Whig general by the name of Winfield Scott invaded Veracruz, Mexico, on the east coast of Mexico, and then pushed 100 miles up into the interior of Mexico to take Mexico City. It was bitter fighting, but many Texas Rangers were accompanied Winfield Scott's army into Mexico City, and Mexico City was finally taken after heavy fighting in September of 1847. But even then, Santa Anna and the Mexican government fled the capital and refused, once again, to negotiate an end to this conflict. The Texas Rangers joined Scott in Mexico City on December the 16th of 1847, and to this day, the Texas Rangers have earned a reputation for brutality among the Mexicans of Mexico, because they were known as Los Diablos Tejanos, the terrible devil Texans, the devil Texans. And the Texas Rangers did nothing to harm their image of being brutal during the Mexican War. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo on February the 2nd of 1848 ended the Mexican War, confirming the Rio Grande as Texas' southern boundary, bringing California and New Mexico into the United States in return for $18.25 million. And the U.S. assumed $5 million of pre-war Mexican debts that she owed to the United States. So for a grand total of $23.25 million, we brought all this land into the United States. Remember that John Slidell would have offered Mexico some $30 million for New Mexico and California if she would have accepted the Rio Grande as the border between the United States and Mexico, but she didn't receive him. So understand that we Americans are not gracious winners. We defeated Mexico, and then we paid her about 2/3 of, or 3/4 of what we would have been willing to pay her for that land before the war. But the acquisition of New Mexico caused problems between the state of Texas and the United States government, because Texas claimed about the eastern half of what is today the state of New Mexico, all the way from the headwaters of the Rio Grande, and Texas claimed Santa Fe, Albuquerque, Taos, Las Vegas, New Mexico, the major cities of New Mexico as being part of Texas and the old Republic of Texas. In 1846, in the Mexican War, United States Lieutenant Stephen Kearny occupied New Mexico territory and established a civil government without any regard to Texas claims. And Texas Governor Pinckney Henderson, in June of 1847, reminded the United States Secretary of State James Buchanan of Texas claims to the New Mexico territory. Buchanan saw Congress as an arbitrator and an adjuster of this problem, but promised that the establishment of civil government in Mexico by Stephen Kearny would not affect any claims that Texas had over New Mexico. But the truth is that after 1 month after the war was over, the Texas legislature created the Santa Fe County and sent Spruce M. Baird, to Santa Fe, New Mexico as county judge of the Santa Fe County. When Baird arrived, he was opposed by the United States military and New Mexico civilians, and he was told on arrival by United States Colonel John Washington that Washington would sustain the civil government created by Kearny at every peril. And a New Mexico convention asked Congress to establish territorial status for New Mexico. And so obviously she was hoping that she could become an independent a state within the United States of America. When Zachary Taylor became president on March the 2nd of 1849, Taylor assumed the presidency, and he favored statehood for both California and New Mexico, which meant that the Republic of Texas was in trouble relative to our western lands. In 1849, Texas Governor George Wood and his successor, Peter Bell, both urged the Texas legislature to authorize a force to send to New Mexico to maintain Texas' authority. They didn't do that, but in December of 1849, the Texas legislature designated new boundaries for the Santa Fe County and created 3 more counties south of it in what is today New Mexico, the state of New Mexico. Robert S. Neighbors was sent to organize these 3 Texas counties. He first organized El Paso County, but found enormous resistance in New Mexico. Neighbors' report, caused a special session of the Texas legislature in August of 1850 to urge that Texas assert its claims to the New Mexico territory. However, New Mexico began to organize its own government. And at that point, Zachary Taylor died, and his successor, Vice President and now President Millard Fillmore, favored a political settlement to the issue of Texas public lands. There were 3 different plans that were introduced into Congress to resolve this land dispute between the Republic of Texas and the United States. Senator John Bell of Tennessee proposed dividing Texas up into 3 states to compensate for the loss of her western territories. Another plan was by Senator Hart of Missouri, and the third plan was crafted by a congressional subcommittee. While different, all 3 plans had common elements. All limited Texas south of the 3630 line, all promised compensation of one sort or another, including enhanced representation in the case of Representative Bell. And Zachary Taylor opposed all of them, and thus none of them passed. But after Taylor's death, Millard Fillmore met with the leadership of Congress as part of the Compromise of 1850, a bill went through Congress in September of 1850s, and it was supported by the Texas delegation and a majority of representatives and senators from both the North and the South. Texas would renounce all claims to lands to her west of the Republic of Texas, and she would be paid up to $10 million in United States bonds. The bill also authorized the territory of New Mexico, and while Texans were not crazy about losing their western lands, they were happy to have a vast majority of this money that the Republic of Texas owed in terms of debts assumed by the United States government. And $10 million went a fair way toward paying the debts of the Republic of Texas. In fact, $10,078,703 of principal and interest eventually were paid to Texas, and that paid off about 77% of the debts of the Republic of Texas, and it was a good deal for Texas. But as a result, of the Compromise of 1850, Texas public lands were taken away from her, and her most northern boundary is the 3630 line of the Compromise of 1820, and then out in West Texas you had those right-angled 90-degree lines drawn that formed the Texas western and northern panhandle regions of Texas as a result of the Compromise of 1850. $2 million of that 10.7 million was eventually remitted to the counties, and that helped keep taxes low, and it helped provide for for educational purposes in the future for the former Republic of Texas, now a state within the United States. By 1850, in the Compromise of 1850, Texas was growing. In 1850, Galveston, with 5,000 citizens, was the largest Texas city, followed by San Antonio, Houston, New Braunfels, and Marshall. Austin had all of 600 citizens in 1850. But by 1860, 20 Texas cities had more than 1,000, and San Antonio, with 8,000 citizens, had overtaken and replaced Galveston as the largest city within Texas. Texas had very little industry. There were, in 1860, only 983 businesses that could be called manufacturing industries in Texas. And of the 983, those 983 averaged about 4 workers apiece. Texas was not industrialized. New York, Pennsylvania each had 22,000 manufacturing companies by 1860, when Texas only had 983. Transportation in the new Texas, in the new state of the United States, Texas, was very primitive, with roads improvements left to Texas counties. Roads were either animal paths or Indian trails, and the quality of roads were determined by the height of the stumps to be found in the middle of the road. Let me say that again. The quality of a road was determined by the height of the stumps to be found in the road. Conestoga wagons that were 36 inches, the axles were 36 inches, 48 inches off the ground. You could just chop trees off and leave great stumps, and the wagons would roll over the top of those stumps. But as roads improved, they had to lower the stumps. So eventually, the quality of a Texas road was determined by the height of the stumps to be found in the road. And eventually, when automobiles came in to vogue, they had to remove all stumps, and we had to have a perfectly flat surface for automobiles. Witness the lowriders of today that are about 3 inches off the ground. You know that you can't have stumps in the road, or you can't hit a manhole, because bad things are going to happen if you hit an obstacle with a lowrider. In fact, Texas transportation was very difficult in the period before the American Civil War. And with the discovery of gold in California in 1848, and with 100,000 Americans flocking out to California in 1849, the California San Francisco 49ers honor those who went to California in 1849 to the gold fields. The Indians were stirred up on the frontier, and the United States had to provide massive numbers of troops in Texas at new places such as Fort Martin Scott over in Fredericksburg, Fort Concho out in San Angelo, to protect travelers who were encroaching on Indian territory in their zeal to get to California. In fact, there were very few railroads before the Civil War in Texas. The legislature in 1854 actually authorized money and land for each mile of track constructed in Texas. But by 1860, there were only 400 miles of railroads existing in all of Texas. Politically, throughout the 1850s, the Whigs, the Democrats in Texas, controlled politics. Before the Civil War, there were no Republicans in Texas per se. Texas Whigs endorsed economic expansion, internal improvements, banking, loyalty to the Union, emphasis on the nation as opposed to the state, and they supported American and Protestant values. So popular was W.B. Ogletree, a popular Texas Whig, by 1853, that the Democrats had rallied around and elected in 1853 Elijah M. Pease, P-E-A-S-E, as governor of Texas. Pease was a very active and able governor, and it was Elijah Pease's administration that was able to set aside some of the money on the 1850 compromise about the Republic lands, be able to set aside about $1 million of that for public education. Pease also granted charters for railroad development, and the Elijah Pease administration established 3 reservations to help resolve the Indian problem in Texas. But partisanship became more and more real during the Pease administration, 1853, 1854. By 1854, a new political party was emerging in Texas called the Know Nothing political party. Actually, the formal name was the American Party, but it was a secret political party. When members of the party would meet and reporters would gather and say, "Hey, what do you guys believe in?" the official American Party response was to say, "I know nothing, I know nothing." And so the Know Nothing, K-N-O-W, Know Nothing political party was born. The Know Nothings opposed foreigners holding office. It was decidedly anti-Catholic and strongly pro-union. The Know Nothings elected the mayor of Galveston in 1855, and it was a secret group. For instance, in 1855, in June of 1855, the Know Nothings met in a state convention, and they referred to their state convention as a River Improvement Association meeting. So it was a secret meeting. And in 1855, the Whigs nominated Lieutenant Governor D.C. Dixon for the governorship of Texas. In fact, the Know Nothings received the endorsement and support of Sam Houston, who flirted with the Know Nothings, and that gave them great credibility. But the Democratic Party met in its convention denouncing all secret groups and renominated Pease in 1855. Pease won the election, ending the Know Nothing attempt to grow into a political party in Texas. But the Know Nothings in 1855 managed to elect 20 representatives to the Texas House of Representatives and 5 senators to the Texas State Senate in 1855. Secrecy of the Know Nothing Party was one thing, but over and above partisanship, there remained the key to Texas politics in the late 1850s was those who supported and those who opposed the political aspirations of Sam Houston. Houston Democrats called themselves Jackson Democrats or Unionists. Opposed to the Jackson Democrats were Deep South Calhoun Democrats. The differences were personal as well as over principles and policies. But as a United States Senator, Sam Houston had wounded pro-slavery Calhoun Democrat leaders in 1848, supporting the creation of Free Soil, Oregon, and refusing to sign John C. Calhoun's pro-slavery protest over the aggressiveness of the Free States. Houston's Senate speeches before the Compromise of 1850 were controversial, but his support of the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854 was viewed by political treason by many Southern Democrats. His dalliance with the Know-Nothings in 1855 added to the Texas Calhoun Democrats' hatred of Sam Houston. Believing that the Texas legislature would not re-elect him to the United States Senate, Houston resigned from the U.S. Senate in 1857 and announced that he was seeking the governorship of Texas in 1857. He ran as an independent Democrat, running against Hardin Runnels, Runnels. Hardin Runnels was a Calhoun Democrat who supported reopening of the African slave trade. But Houston's most determined antagonist and opponent was the fire eater Lewis T. Wigfall, who was a states' rights champion, and eventually he would be appointed to the United States Senate to represent Texas in 1859. Wigfall and Runnels hounded Houston, defeating Sam Houston in the only major race he ever lost in his entire political life in 1857. Calhoun Democrats were states' rights and white supremacists who endorsed the Knights of the Golden Circle. The Knights of the Golden Circle wanted to create a slave empire in the United States, the Caribbean, and in Latin America, and condemned the new Republican Party that was growing in the American North. Thus, by 1858, many Texas Democrats edged closer to the Deep South supremacist Democrats in their rabid defense of the institution of slavery at all costs. The Hardin-Runnels administration, 1858-1859, was caught up in pre-Civil War tension. And indeed, by 1859, Houston had effectively criticized Hardin-Runnels' lack of frontier support and defense, Hardin's support of the African slave trade, and his support of the principle of secession if the Deep South Democrats didn't get what they wanted from the national government. Houston, now in 1859, distanced himself from the Know-Nothings and Houston attracted non-slave supporting voters in the South, in the North, in the West of Texas. He appealed to those who sat out the 1857 election, and in 1859, Houston won 35,000 votes to 27,500 for Hardin Runnels. It was a personal victory for Sam Houston because the secessionists in the Texas legislature elected that same year Lewis Wigfall, the fire-eating Southern Calhoun Democrat, to represent Texas in the United States Senate. When members of the Texas House wasted 2 months debating the selection of a Republican speaker in December of 1859 and January 1860, thereby delaying measures that would have provided for defense of the Texas frontier, many Texas Democrats were convinced the Republicans held their own political party concerns above all others, angering Texas Democrats even more. And so, in the Texas State Convention in Galveston in April of 1860, the dominant Calhoun states' rights majority declared Texas' right to withdraw from the Confederacy, meaning the Union of American States, and resume her place among the powers of the earth as a sovereign, independent nation. The Texas Democratic Party condemned the National Republican Party and inferred that the election of a Republican president would ruin the Union in November of 1860. But to the National Democratic Convention, Runnels, Francis Lubbock, Guy Bryan, R.B. Hubbard, and Thomas Ogletree, all Calhoun Democrats, all were sent as delegates, and they were very strong advocates of pro-slavery perspectives. When the National Democratic Convention endorsed popular sovereignty in the territories and denounced the Dred Scott decision, Texas and 7 other southern states delegates withdrew from the National Party. Subsequently, that meant that Stephen Douglas of Illinois was nominated by the Democrats, the National Democrats representing the North at the National Convention. When the Southern delegates gathered about a month later in Richmond, Virginia, they nominated John C. Brackenridge from Kentucky, a pro-slavery advocate, as the Southern Democratic nominee. In Texas, the Constitutional Union Party of pro-Southern farmers, Whigs, and ex-know-nothings created their own party, Constitutional Union, and at a national convention in Baltimore, Sam Houston received 57 votes to 68.5 for John Bell of Tennessee, and Bell became the Constitutional Union candidate in November of 1860. In other words, Houston lost out to the nomination of the Constitutional Union Party, and Houston believed to the day he died that if he had been elected president under the Constitutional Union Party, that he had enough friends in the Democratic Party and he had cultivated enough friends in the Republican Party that perhaps he could have saved the nation from a civil war. But as it was, in November of 1860, with the Lincoln-Hamlin ticket not on the ballot in Texas, Northern Democrat Stephen Douglas received 410 votes. Brackenridge, the Southern Democratic candidate, received 47,000 votes, and Bell of the Constitutional Union Party received 15,000. So the reality is that Texas would very quickly leave the Union because of the election of a Republican president, Abraham Lincoln. In December of 1860, Texas moved toward secession. Governor Sam Houston convened the legislature, but he refused to call for a convention, a secessionist convention. When Governor Houston didn't act, the radicals in the Texas legislature called for a January 1861 state convention. Elections were held. The convention was convened on January the 28th of 1861, but in December the 17th, the governor called the legislature into special session to meet on January the 21st, 1 week before the secessionist convention. The convention met. Secessionists immediately elected Orrin Roberts of the Supreme Court, the Texas Supreme Court, as president, and passed a resolution calling on the state to secede from the Union. The final vote on secession passed 166 to 8, with every no vote of the 8 booed roundly. 46,000 Texans voted for secession, and only 14,600 opposed secession, despite the work of Houston, Throckmorton, John Hancock, Texan John Hancock, and leading newspapers of the state. But in March of 1861, the secessionist convention reconvened in Austin, and on March the 5th, 1861, approved, ratified, and accepted the provisional government of the Confederate States of America by a vote of 109 to 2 and requested immediate annexation into the Confederacy. Texas as part of the United States of America was no more. The first thing that the Texas government was called upon to do was to take an oath of allegiance to the new Confederate state government. And Sam Houston, as governor of Texas, was called upon to take the oath of office in loyalty, showing his loyalty to the Confederacy. And Houston would not do so. But that's another issue for another lecture. So this ends the third lecture of the second testing period, and I'll see you soon with additional lectures, but until then I'll see you in the clouds. Bye.